I've lived in northern Vermont my entire life, and I've seen my fair share of brutal winters. But there was something about the winter of last year that still lingers in the back of my mind like a slow, spreading frostbite. Something that clung to the walls of my house long after the ice melted outside. Something that made silence feel heavier and darker than it had any right to be. I lived in a small wooden cabin on the outskirts of a quiet town with barely 800 residents, surrounded by dense maple forests that became black silhouettes after sunset. I moved there originally because I wanted peace. The kind of peace where the loudest thing you heard at night was the furnace kicking on, or the occasional crack of a tree limb snapping under the weight of ice. But peace is a fragile thing, thinner than the sheet of frost on my window in the early morning. And that winter, something started visiting my cabin. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual, just the typical howling winds that slammed snow against my windows and made the old wooden walls groan as if the house itself were exhaling in the cold. I remember one particular night in early December. The temperature had dropped to nearly -20, and the power flickered off and on as the storm outside intensified. I was sitting in my living room near the fireplace, wrapped in blankets, reading, when the storm created such a violent gust that it sounded like someone scraping their nails across the front of my house. I paused, listening, telling myself it was just ice being pushed around. But the noise came again, slower, more deliberate, and it made my skin sting the way cold wind does when it slips under your clothes. I got up, went to the window, and squinted outside. Visibility was almost zero, just a swirling white chaos illuminated by my porch light. I shrugged it off, returned to the couch, and tried to focus on my book again. But the scraping didn't stop. In fact, it became more rhythmic, like something circling my house and dragging something across the wall as it moved. A raccoon or deer? Possible. But not in a storm like that. Animals hunker down, they don't wander. The wind eventually died down at around 2 in the morning, and I fell asleep on the couch with the fire slowly dying beside me. The next morning, I bundled up and went outside to shovel the walkway leading to my truck. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't boot prints. They weren't animal prints. They looked almost human, bare human feet, but elongated, the toes too long, the arch too high. They started beside my house, then trailed along the entire front wall, then around the side, and disappeared behind the corner. The prints were deep, whatever made them had weight. I froze there in the snow, feeling the numbness in my fingertips worsening even with gloves on, because those prints weren't there the previous afternoon. And there was no way in hell someone was walking barefoot in -20 degrees during a storm like that. The rational part of my mind went into overdrive. Snow can distort shapes, melt and refreeze to make strange patterns. Wind can carve odd depressions, but the prints were too precise. I followed them around the side of the house, and my breath turned to ice in my beard. The footprints led to one of my windows. They stopped there. The snow was disturbed right up against the wall, as if something had been standing a few inches from the window, staring inside. Something barefoot, something tall, something heavy. I scanned the forest line, the driveway, the road, nothing. Just silence and white stillness. I tried to laugh it off. I tried to tell myself, this is what happens when you live alone for too long in the woods. In winter, your imagination fills in the gaps. But then, 2 nights later, the scratching returned. This time, it wasn't on the wall. It was on the window. Slow, controlled, deliberate tapping, like knuckles. I didn't move. I just sat up in bed with the sheets pulled to my chin, staring into the darkness of my bedroom, listening. Tap, 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 then a long scrape downward, stopping just above the window frame. My breath felt trapped in my throat. I quietly reached for my phone, but froze when I heard something else. A breath. Not mine, not wind. A slow, audible exhale right on the other side of the glass. I didn't check the window that night. I couldn't. I stayed awake until the tapping stopped, until my own exhaustion finally outweighed the fear. The next day, more prints in the snow. More strange, too long, too deep footprints circling the house. This time, though, I noticed something even worse. The prints weren't symmetrical. One foot looked human enough, elongated but human. The other looked wrong, twisted, as if the heel and toes were reversed or rotated. My stomach tightened as I knelt to examine them. Again, they led to the same window. Again, they stopped facing it, as if something had been standing there for hours, watching. This continued for days. Sometimes I'd hear soft, dragging footsteps on the porch at 3 a.m. Sometimes the tapping on the windows would start just as I was drifting to sleep. Other nights, something would brush against the exterior walls with what sounded like fingers, thin fingers, and every morning new prints. Always in the same pattern, always circling, always returning to the windows. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Hey, there's a barefoot giant with deformed feet walking around my cabin every night and staring through my windows? They'd write me off instantly, maybe even check me into something. So I kept it to myself until the night of December 19th, the coldest night of the year, the night everything escalated. I was asleep for maybe an hour when a sound snapped me awake, a deep, heavy thump on my porch, like someone stepping onto it with significant weight. I held my breath, listening. Another thump, then another, slow, measured, approaching my front door. I quietly got out of bed, grabbed the baseball bat I kept beside the dresser, and tiptoed into the hallway. The house felt too quiet, too still. Even the wind outside had gone silent, leaving nothing but the faint crackle of the furnace and the pounding of my heart. Then came the doorknob, the unmistakable sound of it turning. Metal shifting against metal as something outside tried slowly, carefully to open it. The lock held, but the pressure on the knob grew louder, stronger, as if whatever was out there was testing its strength. Then, tapping on the door. 3 taps, soft, knuckles. I swallowed hard, gripping the bat. Whoever, or whatever, was outside could clearly see the lights were off. They thought I was asleep. They were trying to get in, without waking me. I stepped backwards, keeping my eyes on the door, and went to grab my phone from the kitchen table. That's when I heard something that froze me in place. A voice, a whisper, right outside the door. "Let me in." The voice didn't sound human, too breathy, too strained, like someone trying to mimic speech without fully understanding how to shape the words. I dialed 911 instantly, whispering into the phone. The operator told me to stay inside, stay out of sight, and wait for officers. But before she could finish, I heard footsteps, heavy ones, moving away from the door. Then, silence. The police arrived 20 minutes later, 2 cruisers, 4 officers, lights flashing against the snow. They searched the property while one officer spoke with me inside. When the others returned, they said they found nothing unusual, no tracks, no signs of anyone near the house. I insisted I'd heard someone. I insisted there had been footprints every morning for nearly 2 weeks. But when we stepped outside, the snow was pristine. No prints, no disturbances, nothing. I felt insane, delusional, but I wasn't. Because after the officers left, I saw something they missed. On my bedroom window, a handprint, not made of snow, made of condensation and something oily, smeared into long, narrow fingers with 5 uneven tips that left streaks trailing downward. Like it had pressed its face against the glass to look inside, and its breath had fogged the window. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. Or the next. Eventually, after a week of constant dread, the noises stopped. The tapping ended. The footprints no longer appeared. The house became quiet again. Peaceful, even. Too peaceful. Like something was waiting. Then the final night came, December 28th. I woke up to absolute silence. But not the normal kind. This silence felt wrong, thick, pressing down. I got out of bed slowly, sensing that something was off. When I entered the living room, my stomach dropped. Every single window in my house, every one, had a handprint on it. Large, oily, smudged. Some smeared downward, some sideways, some high, some low. Dozens of prints. As if something huge had circled the entire house multiple times, pressing its hands against every window, staring inside each room. I grabbed my keys, rushed to my truck, and didn't look back. I spent the rest of the winter at a friend's house, 3 towns over. When I finally returned in spring, the snow was long gone. The windows were clean. The forest was alive again. Everything looked completely normal, except for one thing. A single footprint pressed into the mud beside my bedroom window. Bare, elongated, deep, and beside it another print, twisted, misshapen, facing the window, staring. I never thought a delivery run would turn into the most terrifying night of my life. And even now, months later, when I close my eyes and picture that stretch of Colorado Highway 134, I can still feel the wind cutting through me, as if the freezing gusts never really stopped, like they embedded themselves into my bones and refused to leave. I had been working late-night shifts for a local courier company for almost a year, and winter in the Rockies was always brutal. But that night was something else entirely. The kind of night that makes you question every choice you've ever made and every mile you thought you could safely drive through snow and darkness. I left Denver around 10:30 at night, heading for a small drop in the mountains, a place that barely existed on the GPS, just coordinates someone had typed into the app and hoped I could reach them. The road was empty, like it always is past midnight, and the blizzard had already begun. Wind screaming through the trees and snowflakes stinging my face as I cracked the window just to check the mirrors. Visibility was almost zero. The street lights were spaced too far apart to matter, and the whiteout turned every sign into a ghostly blur. I passed the first switchback, thinking the storm would ease up, but it didn't. In fact, it seemed to intensify, almost deliberately, as if the wind itself had intent, pushing me, nudging me along, whispering that I wasn't alone. I told myself to focus, keep driving, keep the heater on full, music loud enough to drown out the howling outside, but that's when I first noticed the car. I saw it in my rearview mirror. Or maybe I imagined it the way the headlights cut through the snow, a dim, grayish glow just at the edge of perception. It was parked on the shoulder, though I could see no driver, no shape, just the silhouette of a sedan blanketed in frost. I slowed down, thinking maybe it was abandoned, someone had left it there, or maybe a hiker had gotten lost. But the closer I got, the more certain I became that it was moving, or at least that it was tracking me. The headlights followed me in perfect sync, shifting when I turned the wheel, accelerating when I did, yet still far enough behind to be plausible. My stomach turned over. I glanced at the GPS, and the estimated arrival said 30 minutes to my drop. I told myself I'd reach the delivery point, pull over, and they'd be gone. Maybe it was just another driver, another lost courier, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The road narrowed as I entered the switchback curves, the snow thickening, the wind now battering the car from all sides. I could barely see beyond the hood, and still, in the corner of my eye, that car stayed there. My pulse was hammering, and the adrenaline made my hands shake uncontrollably. I wanted to call the dispatcher, but my cell signal was gone. Dead, swallowed by the mountains. No one could hear me. I tried the horn once, short taps, but got no reaction from the car behind. No lights flicker, no brake lights, nothing. Just that cold, relentless glow, staying with me like a predator keeping pace. Panic began to creep in, crawling through my veins like ice, chilling every thought. I drove faster, foot pressing down harder on the accelerator, tires spinning over the packed snow. The storm seemed alive, as if it wanted me to struggle, to tire, to make a mistake. Then the road ahead went down a small dip, and for a split second, I caught sight of the car in the reflection of my side mirror. There was a figure inside, barely visible, pale, unmoving, staring directly at me. I screamed internally, slammed the steering wheel with my left hand, and my right hand fumbled for the defroster button, desperately trying to clear the windshield because I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to look, but it kept finding me in the mirrors, in the faint glint off the snow, in the fleeting shadows of the mountains, always watching. I tried rationalizing someone's out in this storm. No, they can't be. The road is empty. The snow is deep. Visibility zero. But the figure's gaze bore into me, and I couldn't turn away. And then it happened, the first mistake. A patch of black ice that I didn't see in the limited visibility. My truck spun, fish-tailed, and I lost control for a second, careening toward the embankment. My heart exploded in my chest. When I finally regained some semblance of control, I looked in the rearview, gone. I exhaled, convincing myself it had been my imagination, that my mind was breaking in the cold, isolated mountains. But then, as I crested the next hill, there it was again, headlights glinting through the storm like a predator waiting in ambush. And this time, I noticed something impossible. The snow around it was untouched. There was no track, no tire mark leading from the shoulder. It was just there, moving in perfect tandem, yet leaving no evidence of how it got there. My breathing became shallow, ragged, fingers gripping the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles went white. I started muttering to myself, repeating the address, repeating my purpose: deliver the package, get to safety, get to town. But the car stayed with me, shadowing every move, never blinking, never leaving. Panic escalated into terror as I reached the final stretch of switchbacks, a long descent into a canyoned valley. The snow was deeper, the wind howling as if laughing. Then the headlights disappeared. A brief reprieve. I exhaled, trying to calm my pulse. But then, through the swirling snow, I saw movement ahead. A figure, standing in the middle of the lane. A man? Something? Too tall. Too thin. Too still. The storm made it hard to discern, but I knew instantly it wasn't human. Not fully. My mind screamed at me to stop, to swerve, to back up, but my truck slid toward it uncontrollably. I braked hard. Tires skidded. The figure didn't move, not a step. Then I saw its head tilt, slowly, deliberately. And for the first time, I understood the truth. It had been with me all along. In the car, in the storm, in the mirrors, stalking me across the mountains. And now it wanted me to see it clearly. The next moments happened in a blur. My truck spun again, sliding toward the snowbank. I tried to swerve, tried to accelerate, tried anything, but the tires refused to grip the ice. The figure began to advance, and then I realized it wasn't walking, it was gliding, silently, impossibly fast, across the snow-covered road, matching my truck's speed. My chest heaved, my vision blurred with tears and fear, and I slammed my foot onto the gas, praying the truck wouldn't roll into the edge. Then, finally, the delivery cabin came into view, a faint light cutting through the storm. I aimed for it, tires slipping, skidding, and with a final, violent jolt, I crashed through the snowdrift in front of the cabin. The truck shuddered, stopped. I jumped out, heart pounding, and sprinted to the door, barely registering the storm whipping against me. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and locked it. Inside, the small heater kicked on, but the warmth didn't reach my frozen limbs. I leaned against the wall, chest heaving, trying to rationalize, trying to tell myself it had been a hallucination, the stress, the isolation, the storm. But then I looked outside, and through the frosted windows, I saw the headlights. The car was back, parked on the shoulder, engine off. No tire tracks in the snow. And the figure, tall and thin, standing perfectly still next to it, staring directly at the cabin. I screamed, banged on the window, shaking, crying, but it didn't move. It only stared. Hours passed. I couldn't sleep, couldn't calm down. Morning came, but the snowstorm had swallowed all evidence. No tracks, no car, no figure. Just a deep, heavy silence, the mountains swallowing any proof of what had happened. I never made another delivery that night. I left the truck at the cabin, called my boss the next morning, told him I couldn't continue, and months later, I still avoid that stretch of road. I drive a longer route, extra cautious, lights on full, windows locked. And sometimes, when the wind is strong and the mountains howl, I swear I see those headlights through the snow, just for a moment, and my heart stops as I remember that night. That night I realized some things follow you in ways you cannot escape, across distances you think are safe, and in blizzards that seem endless. They wait, patient, relentless, unseen, yet always watching, until you make the mistake of seeing them. I never thought working the graveyard shift at a convenience store in northern Colorado during winter would become the most terrifying experience of my life. The kind of night that makes you rethink why you ever chose to be alone in a building that creaks, groans, and whispers when everyone else is asleep. But it did. And I remember every chilling second of it as if it happened yesterday, though months have passed and I've never returned. I had been working there for about 6 months, a small, isolated 24/7 store off Highway 285, surrounded by empty parking lots, pine forests, and occasional snowdrifts that sometimes made the asphalt disappear completely at night. The town was small, barely more than a stopover for truckers and travelers, but it was my only job, and the pay was decent enough to justify enduring the lonely, bitterly cold nights. It was a particularly harsh January evening, the wind slicing through the gaps in the building like knives, and the snowstorm had intensified all day, making every inch of the parking lot a treacherous sea of ice and frozen piles. Around midnight, things began normally. I restocked shelves, checked the registers, and sipped coffee that was already lukewarm, the heater humming softly behind me. Outside, the blizzard howled, and headlights from distant cars were rare, ephemeral flickers that disappeared almost as soon as they appeared. Around 2 a.m, I noticed movement in the parking lot, which wasn't unusual given the occasional trucker or lost traveler, but this felt different. I saw a figure walking slowly between snow-covered cars, just outside the light's reach, almost too far to discern details, but something about the gait, the stiffness, made my stomach twist. I assumed it was a delivery driver trying to reach a truck, but then I realized it was heading in my direction. Slowly, purposefully. The cold wind blew directly at me when I peered through the window, making it hard to see, and yet, despite the blizzard, I could clearly see that the figure wasn't wearing a jacket appropriate for the temperature, and that made no sense at all. Temperatures were well below zero. I watched it walk toward the entrance, its pace slow and measured, its head tilted slightly, and as it approached the glass doors, I saw that it wasn't moving its legs the way humans do. Almost gliding, yet its boots still left impressions in the snow, deep, dark, perfectly spaced. I froze. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it over the storm. I considered calling the cops, but the snowstorm had probably knocked out their response times, and even if they came, by the time they arrived, who knew if the figure would even still be there? And then it stopped, right at the edge of the light spilling from the doors, just standing, looking. For minutes it did not move, and the lights from inside the store didn't seem to affect it. I couldn't see a face, only shadows and pale reflections, as if the snow itself had frozen around its head. Then, abruptly, it turned and began moving along the side of the building, around the back. I watched it from the front windows, heart hammering, thinking maybe I should follow it, see if it was some idiot lost in the storm. But something deep inside told me not to, and I stayed rooted. Minutes passed. Then, a loud banging from the back door startled me so violently I spilled my coffee. 3, 4, 5 consecutive bangs. Whoever it was outside, they were trying the door. I ran to the back of the store and peered through the small window, heart in my throat, and saw the figure standing there, impossibly still, hand raised, pressing against the frosted glass. The banging stopped. The storm continued, but it felt as though the world itself had gone silent. Then, from behind me, I heard the sound of a cart moving. Not my own, but one in the storage room, slowly dragging across the floor. My stomach dropped. I spun around, bat in hand, and nothing. Just shelves. Nothing moved. I rationalized. Wind? Snow shifting inside? No, the storm was outside. The building was sealed, and yet I could hear it. Faint but distinct. Footsteps echoing in the aisles. Slow, methodical, coming closer and closer. I held my breath, praying it was my imagination. But the sound grew, and then I heard a whisper. Not words, not language, just a drawn-out, guttural exhale right beside my ear, almost like someone had been standing there all along. I swung the bat. Nothing. Empty aisle. I backed up toward the front, realizing that no matter what, I couldn't leave the store. The figure outside the back door hadn't moved, and now there were more sounds. Scratches on the floor, whispers from the ceiling vents, a dragging, scraping noise from the frozen parking lot. My phone had no signal. The alarm system's battery was dead, and the heater sputtered, struggling to stay alive in the cold. And then, through the glass doors, I saw movement. Another figure, pale, tall, gliding across the snow-covered lot, eyes glowing faintly orange in the dim light. Not human. I knew that immediately, because the proportions were all wrong. Too long limbs, too thin, the head slightly oversized, hands reaching farther than they should. Moving unnaturally, yet effortlessly. Panic hit like a sledgehammer. I ran to the storage closet, locked the door, hoping to buy time, hoping whatever this was would leave. Minutes dragged like hours. The storm howled, and I could hear it circling the building, the soft crunch of snow outside, punctuated by whispers, sighs, almost amused. I pressed my ear to the wall, heart racing, and heard it footsteps above, from the ceiling vents. I didn't even know how they had gotten there, but I knew it was true. Every instinct screamed to run, to get out, but there was no escape. Outside, the storm would freeze me within minutes. Inside, the store was a trap, and this thing had every advantage. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I had no concept of time. Finally, the banging ceased. Silence returned. But it was heavier, pressing, palpable. I dared a peek through the closet door, barely lifting the latch, and saw the figure at the back door, staring in through the window, perfectly still. Its eyes glowed faintly orange, as if reflecting the storm itself. I knew then, in that split second, that it had been waiting, always watching, letting me live in fear until it chose to reveal itself fully. I bolted toward the front door, threw it open, and the blizzard hit me like a wall. The figure wasn't outside, not even a trace in the snow. Nothing, just silence. I collapsed against the porch roof overhang, shivering, hyperventilating, convinced I had imagined everything. But then, from the side of the store, I saw footprints, hundreds of them, leading from the lot to the trees. Some normal size, some elongated, impossible in proportion. And at the edges, faint handprints in the snow, smeared, wide, dragging, like whatever had been walking there had touched the snow with long fingers. I never returned to that store at night after that. I quit within the week. Months later, I drove past. During the day, snow melted, building normal. Nothing extraordinary. But when the wind is strong and the mountains howl through the empty highway, I swear I can see the faint glow of eyes in the snow and hear whispers that sound like laughter, distant, deliberate, patient, promising that they are still out there, waiting for the next lone person foolish enough to work alone on a winter night. I never thought a job could haunt you, but that night proved otherwise. And I'll never forget it, because even when I'm warm and safe, I can feel it, circling, patient, relentless, in the wind, in the shadows, in the drifting snow, always watching, waiting for the next mistake.